During the late 1950s and early 1960s, the battle for civil rights was raging, especially in the South. Black Americans were protesting against segregation and white supremacy, while racist white Southerners fought back, oftentimes with violence. Mattie Green was a beloved wife and mother of 6 kids who lived in Ringgold, Georgia. The couple worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, and they had plans to renovate their house with a focus on providing their children with more space. On May 19th of 1960, the Green family was sleeping peacefully when their community was suddenly rocked by an explosion. The Green family house literally exploded, and falling debris crushed Mattie, which ended her life. Mattie's husband and children thankfully survived, but the loss of their mother was devastating. Hundreds of people attended the funeral, which was held at a small black church in Ringgold. The governor of Georgia, Ernest Vandiver, offered a $500 reward for information on the case. The Catoosa County Sheriff's Office spearheaded the investigation with help from the FBI. One of the main theories in the case was that the motive was the racial tension that saturated the South. It's entirely possible that the Green family was targeted by white supremacists. Another theory was that somebody had a personal grudge against the family. Contemporary newspapers reported that the investigators never officially established the motive. A redacted FBI document from 1960 mentioned 2 bombings that were very similar to the one at the Green residence, and this document stated that the bombings were possibly instigated by a radical splinter group of the Dixie Clan. According to this document, a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation suspected that the bombing of the Green residence was connected to these other 2 bombings. In 2009, the FBI reopened the investigation into the Green family bombing as part of the Department of Justice Cold Case Initiative. The FBI conducted interviews with more than 20 people from Ringgold, including Mattie's friends and neighbors. During these interviews, 2 potential suspects emerged, Lester Waters and W.E. Waters, who were both rumored to be involved. Lester was a known member of the Ku Klux Klan, and he had a close friendship with the local sheriff at the time. However, in a memo, the Department of Justice said that the FBI investigation produced few evidentiary leads, and besides, the statute of limitations had already expired by that time in 2012 when the investigation was closed. In a 2022 article in the Oxford American, author Stephen Kearse writes about his visit to the cemetery where Mattie Green is buried. According to him, the cemetery is a stark reminder of the country's segregated past, with one half of the cemetery being white and the other half being black. Furthermore, the black side of the cemetery is in much worse condition than the white side, with overgrown plants and badly weathered headstones. This case demonstrates not just the racial tension of the past, but also the way in which racism still affects the country today. Mattie Green's murder has never been solved. The racial tensions in Georgia go much further back than the 1960s. In the aftermath of World War II, Black American veterans in particular were fed up with being treated as second-class citizens despite their service to the country, but many white supremacists were violently fighting back, oftentimes with lynchings. In July of 1946, a man named L. Joy Harrison employed 2 young black couples as sharecroppers in Walton County, Georgia. One couple were George and Mae Dorsey, while the other couple were Roger and Dorothy Malcolm. George Dorsey was a World War II veteran who had been back in the United States for less than 9 months after serving 5 years in the Pacific Theater. Dorothy Malcolm was George's sister, and she was allegedly pregnant at the time. On July 11th, Roger Malcolm stabbed his landlord and boss, a white man named Barnett Hester. Roger was arrested and held in the county jail. The governor, Eugene Talmadge, returned to Monroe County on July 12th, and he was seen speaking with George Hester, Barnett's brother, in front of the Walton County Courthouse. Eugene allegedly told George Hester that he would provide immunity from prosecution for anyone who took care of Roger. On July 25th, L. Joy Harrison drove Dorothy Malcolm and the Dorseys to Monroe, where he posted bail for Roger. Harrison then drove the 2 couples back to his farm, but they were stopped at around 5:30 p.m. by a gang of approximately 15 to 20 armed white men who were blocking the Moores Ford Bridge. Harrison recalled the following events. A big man who was dressed mighty proud in a double-breasted brown suit was giving the orders. He pointed to Roger Malcolm and said, "We want him." Then he pointed to George Dorsey, my worker, and said, "We want you too, Charlie." I said, "His name ain't Charlie, he's George." Someone said, "Keep your damned big mouth shut, this ain't your party." Harrison watched as the man in the suit ordered his men to get the wives too, and the mob tied the women to an oak tree beside their husbands. The mob proceeded to fire 3 volleys at the group, and the coroner later estimated that they had fired a total of 60 shots. Both couples perished on the scene. The mass lynching caused widespread public outrage, and large protests were held. President Harry Truman ordered the Justice Department to investigate the lynching under federal civil rights law, and he created the President's Committee on Civil Rights in December of 1946. Although Truman's attempts to pass anti-lynching legislation were blocked by white Southerners, the Moores Ford massacre generated increased awareness about racial violence in the country, especially within the white population. Demonstrators started marching outside the White House, demanding an end to lynchings. On July 28th of 1946, a funeral was held for the victims, and George Dorsey's coffin was draped with an American flag. The media had a large presence at the funeral, but many Black Americans stayed away out of fear of retribution. A lawyer named H. William Fiddleson wrote an article about the Moores Ford massacre in the New Republic, which raised many questions about the circumstances of the lynching. For example, why did the sheriff set George's bail at $600, which was a relatively low amount of money? Why did Harrison bail George out when he knew that George would inevitably be found guilty, especially when George was a sharecropper, which was a very easy position to fill? Furthermore, Harrison could have driven the couples to his farm on the nearby highway, which was easier and quicker, but instead he drove on the unpaved dirt side road that took them across the bridge. Fiddleson also finds it suspicious that the mob knew exactly what time of day the couples would be coming across the bridge, and the sheriff had neglected to visit the crime scene afterwards. May Dorsey reportedly called out the names of several people who were in the mob, but Harrison told the authorities that he did not know any of them. Finally, Harrison was not harmed by the mob, which struck Fiddleson as extremely suspicious. Even if he did not know who they were, it would have made much more sense for them to silence any potential witnesses. Georgia Governor Ellis Arnall offered a reward of $10,000 for information on the case, but this did not result in anything. The FBI interviewed nearly 3,000 people over 6 months, and they issued 100 subpoenas. However, detectives noticed that hardly anyone was willing to cooperate with their investigation, and they found very little physical evidence. According to the FBI agents, the white farmers in Monroe County were an extremely insular group who distrusted outsiders, and the black sharecroppers were too afraid of retribution to cooperate with the investigation. They heard rumors that Harrison was a member of the KKK, and during the investigation he changed his story multiple times and contradicted himself. Detectives strongly suspected that he was involved in the lynching. There were also rumors that Eugene Talmadge had been the man leading the mob, but the head investigator on the case did not believe this hypothesis. The legal counsel for the NAACP stated that he had no faith whatsoever in the investigators. On December 2nd of 1946, United States District Judge T. Hoyt Davis selected a 23-man grand jury to hear testimony in the case. Governor Ellis Arnall claimed that around 15 to 20 of the gang members had been identified at that time. Numerous people testified, including Eljoy Harrison, Barnett Hester, various farmers of Monroe County, several family members of the victims, and a woman named Jessie Warwick. Jessie testified that, shortly before the massacre, she had seen at least 2 carloads of people gathered on a roadside in Monroe County. Most people believed that this was a rehearsal for the lynching. A resident of Monroe named George Alvin Adcock was indicted by a grand jury on charges of perjury after he provided false testimony. The first charge claimed that he denied leaving his home on the day of the lynching when he actually did, and the second charge claimed that he denied visiting the scene of the crime the day after the lynching when he actually did. After hearing testimony for nearly 3 weeks straight, the grand jury was unable to establish the identity of any persons guilty of violating the Civil Rights Statute of the United States. Eugene Talmadge won the next Democratic primary in Georgia, but he perished on December 21st of 1946 as a result of his alcoholism. The KKK honored him by placing cards and flowers at his coffin. At around 4 p.m. on January 1st of 1947, two brothers named James and Tom Verner walked into the local ice house and briefly spoke with the manager. One of the employees of the ice house was a black man named Lamar Howard, and he had testified in the Mooresford massacre case. James and Tom approached Lamar and asked him what he told the court. Lamar responded that he had nothing to tell them, and the two brothers proceeded to viciously beat Lamar. The beating lasted for around 10 to 15 minutes with no resistance from Lamar, who was terrified that he would be killed if he fought back. After the brothers finished, Lamar got into his car and went home. The Verner brothers were later arrested, and during the trial they both admitted that they were guilty. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found them not guilty. In 2001, Governor Roy Barnes reopened the investigation with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and by 2006, the FBI had become involved once again. In 2007, the Associated Press reported on findings from thousands of pages of closed FBI files that were released through the Freedom of Information Act. There was evidence that the lynching was ordered, or at the very least endorsed, by Eugene Talmadge. In June of 2008, the authorities searched a farmhouse in Walton County that they believed could be related to the lynching, but they were unable to find anything new. The FBI closed their investigation in 2015. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation closed their own investigation in January of 2018. Nobody was ever charged in the case.
Click the join button to become a member today. Channel members receive exclusive content as well as early access to all my content.
It was the middle of 1979 when two children disappeared from Atlanta, Georgia, just 4 days apart. 14-year-old Edward Hope Smith and 13-year-old Alfred Evans were both found dead in a wooded area on July 28th, Smith having a gunshot wound in the upper back. This event marked the first known murders of the Atlanta child killer. On September 4th of that year, the next victim disappeared while running an errand for his mother. 14-year-old Milton Harvey was riding his bike to the bank for his mother, but that bike was later found in a remote area. Milton's body was discovered in November. On October 21st, 9-year-old Yusuf Bell went to a store to buy snuff for his neighbor, and a witness said that they saw Yusuf at an intersection getting into a blue car. His dead body was found on November 8th in an abandoned elementary school by a janitor who was looking for a place to use the bathroom. Yusuf's body was wearing the same clothes he had disappeared in, although a piece of masking tape was now stuck to them. His cause of death was strangulation, although he had been struck over the head twice. On March 4th of 1980, 12-year-old Angel Lanier left her house at around 4 p.m. wearing a denim outfit, and she was last seen at a friend's house watching TV. Her body was found 6 days later in a vacant lot with the same clothing, although a pair of white underwear had been stuffed in her mouth. Her hands were bound with an electrical cord, and the cause of death was strangulation. On March 11th, the very next week, 11-year-old Jeffrey Mathis went missing while running an errand for his mother. Several months later, a young girl told the authorities that she saw him get into a blue car with two men, one light-skinned and the other dark-skinned. Jeffrey's body was found in a patch of woodlands 11 months after his disappearance, and by that time it was no longer possible to determine cause of death. On May 18th, 15-year-old Eric Middlebrooks vanished under strange circumstances. He was last seen answering the telephone at his house, and immediately after this he rushed outside and left on his bicycle. His body was found the next day along with his bicycle in the rear garage of a bar. Eric's pockets were turned inside out. He had multiple stab wounds across his arms and chest, and the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Interestingly, just 3 weeks before his disappearance, Eric had testified against 3 juveniles in a robbery case. On June 9th, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson went missing while he traveled to a local pool. He was last seen walking towards the DeKalb County's Midway Recreation Center in Midway Park. Christopher's body was found the following January, clothed in unfamiliar swim trunks, alongside another victim who we'll talk about later. The cause of Christopher's death has never been determined. On June 22nd, 7-year-old LaTanya Wilson vanished from her parents' apartment. According to a witness, it seemed as if she had been abducted by 2 men, one of whom was spotted climbing through the window and then holding LaTanya in his arms while speaking to the other man. LaTonya's body was found in a fenced-in area in Atlanta on October 18th, and by that point the body was already skeletonized, meaning that cause of death could not be determined. On June 23rd, 10-year-old Aaron Wyke disappeared after last being seen at a local grocery store, getting inside a blue Chevrolet with either one or two black men. A witness stated that she saw Aaron being led from the store to the car by a 6-foot-tall black man with a mustache and goatee who was around 30 years old. At 6 p.m. that day, Aaron was spotted at a shopping center, but the next day his body was found under a bridge, and the cause of death was a broken neck resultant from a fall. In July of 1980, 2 more children were abducted and murdered, 9-year-old Anthony Carter and 10-year-old Earl Terrell. On August 20th, 13-year-old Clifford Jones went missing, and his body was found behind a dumpster the next day, the cause of death being strangulation. 10-year-old Darren Glass was reported missing on September 14th, and his body has never been recovered. 12-year-old Charles Stevens went missing on October 9th, and his body was found the next day near the entrance to a trailer park. He was missing his shirt and one of his shoes, but he was still wearing his pants. The autopsy determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation. Several dog hairs and 2 Caucasian human hairs were found on the corpse. His boxers were found separately from his body, and the boxers contained 2 pubic hairs that did not belong to Charles. 9-year-old Aaron Jackson vanished on November 1st, and his body was found strangled to death the next day on a riverbank. 16-year-old Patrick Rogers went missing on November 30th, and his body was found on December 7th in the Chattahoochee River. The police speculated that he may have been dropped from a bridge. The first victim of 1981 was 14-year-old Luby Geeter, who went missing on January 3rd and was found dead on February 5th. Luby's friend, 15-year-old Terry Pugh, disappeared in January, and an anonymous source told the police where they could find the body. Between February and March of that year, 6 more bodies were discovered, one of them being 21-year-old Eddie Duncan, the killer's first adult victim. Sometime in April, 3 people were murdered. 20-year-old Larry Rogers, 28-year-old John Porter, and 21-year-old Jimmy Ray Payne. Porter and Payne were both ex-convicts who had recently been released from Arundel State Prison after serving time for burglary charges. On May 12th, FBI agents discovered the dead body of 17-year-old William Barrett on the curb near a wooded area close to his home. A witness who had run out of gas about a mile away from the crime scene stated that he had seen a black man standing at the location of the body before driving away in a white and blue Cadillac. At the end of May, the final reported victim was found. 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater was last seen by a gardener at the entrance of the Rialto Theater in Atlanta, allegedly holding hands with a man named Wayne Williams. Nathaniel's body was found 2 days later. Initially, there were delays in opening an investigation, but things eventually got rolling. The city of Atlanta imposed curfews, and many parents withdrew their children from school, forbidding them from playing outside. The police predicted that the killer might dump their next victim in a body of water to conceal any evidence, so they staked out nearly a dozen local bridges. During one of these stakeouts on December 22nd of 1981, detectives heard the sound of a splash underneath a bridge. Another detective saw a white Chevrolet driving away across the bridge. After radioing fellow officers about their discovery, the Chevrolet was stopped by other police officers about a half-mile from the bridge. The driver of the vehicle was 23-year-old Wayne Bertram Williams, an alleged music promoter and freelance photographer. The Chevrolet belonged to his parents, and when questioned, he told the police that he was on his way to audition a singer named Cheryl Johnson. Wayne told them that Cheryl lived in the town of Smyrna, but the police did not find any records of Cheryl's existence, let alone their appointment. 2 days later was when the authorities found the body of Nathaniel Cater, and it was floating downriver just a few miles from the bridge where detectives had spotted Wayne's Chevrolet. The police believed that Wayne had murdered Nathaniel and disposed of his body in the river. The investigators who had stopped Wayne's car noticed that there were gloves and a nylon cord in his passenger seat. According to them, the cord looked very similar to the ligature marks found around Nathaniel's neck, as well as the marks found on several other victims. However, the cord was never taken in for analysis. Detectives soon discovered that Wayne had recently handed out flyers in mostly black neighborhoods, asking young people between the ages of 11 to 21 to audition for his new singing group, which was called Gemini. The FBI administered a polygraph exam, which Wayne subsequently failed. The authorities found fibers on a carpet in Wayne's residence that matched fibers found on 2 of the victims, and additional fibers from his home, vehicle, and dog were also matched to several victims. A witness came forward to report that he saw Wayne holding hands with Nathaniel on the night that the young boy was killed. On June 21st of 1981, Wayne was arrested and a grand jury indicted him on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the killings of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Payne. The trial date was scheduled for early 1982. When the news of Wayne's arrest was released to the public, an FBI agent named John Douglas stated that if the killer was in fact Wayne, then he was looking pretty good for a good percentage of the killings. Douglas had also conducted an interview with People magazine where he profiled the killer as a young black man. The combination of these 2 events was reported in the media as the FBI calling Wayne guilty before the trial, and Douglas was officially censured by the director of the FBI. The jury consisted of 9 women and 3 men, 8 of whom were black and 4 of whom were white. The trial officially began on January 6th of 1982, with Judge Clarence Cooper presiding. The most important evidence in the proceedings included the fiber analysis connecting Wayne to the victims and the witness statements that seemed to link him to numerous other victims. Some of these witnesses also accused Wayne of attempting to solicit sexual favors from his victims. The prosecution has been heavily criticized for their presentation of the case, in the sense that their actions would likely have resulted in a mistrial in many jurisdictions. One specific example was the testimony of 2 FBI officials who told the court that the chances of Wayne never having come into contact with the victims were practically non-existent, based solely on the rarity of the fibers found in his home. After reviewing the case, the Georgia Supreme Court deemed this to be inadmissible in a court of law. On February 27th of 1982, after 11 hours of deliberation, Wayne was found guilty on 2 charges of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences at Hancock State Prison.